You've been home for a couple of years now, buddy, but you're still fighting the war.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Shoulder to Shoulder, where we tell stories to bridge the Civ Mill gap. I am Will Silber. Some people call me GCV. Some call me a lot worse, and that's all right. I'm used to it by now. I am joined by my co-host, James Metter, my former senior NCO of the Capisa and Parwan Provincial Reconstruction Team. What's up, bro? How's it going, man?
Just another beautiful day in sunny Florida. How about yourself?
It's not bad. It's starting to warm up in Texas. The winter's been a little bit much, but hey, that's all right. I'm a happy man to be back in Texas.
Yeah, ours has been rough. I've had to put on like full pants and closed-toed shoes. So
you got to take it easy, James. Retire.
Living in paradise.
Come to you, bro. Well, we are both really excited to bring on our guest, Rebekah Edmondson. She does a lot of stuff. What is your official title for Next Mission?
Well, it still feels really awkward to say, but I guess officially I'm the Chief Executive Officer.
Woo! The CEO of Next Mission, which is a nonprofit. Is it specifically focusing on Afghan female commandos, or is it broader than that?
Well, for the time being, it is. It's focusing on the ladies of the Afghan Female Tactical Platoon, but with the aim to expand the services out to their male colleagues once that becomes a viable option.
That is. So we're going to talk a lot about female commandos. We're going to talk a little bit about the Moral Injury Support Group that Rebekah has been leading for GCV since July. And so we are excited to have you on and discuss all things Afghanistan, your project, and then moral injury. First question: how did you get involved in Afghanistan? What was your journey towards that wonderful part of the world?
I was made aware of the program, the Cultural Support Team program. At the time, it belonged to USASOC. And that was 2011. So during the Obama administration, there was a big push to try and get more participation from the ladies in the armed services. So it was actually a program that at the time was opened up to any branch of service. So I saw, an ALARAC message come through my email, and it was just encouraging women to try out for a program that was aimed at specific deployments to Afghanistan. And you would support either the village stability operations or the direct action side, which is what I ended up doing. So of all my deployments, I spent working with the 5th Ranger Regiment as the token female that would go out on night raids and search and question all the women and children that were encountered during those operations.
Woo! So, first off, she served in the 75th Ranger Regiment. For my audience that doesn't know who they are, 5th Ranger Regiment or the Door Kickers. I know a lot of Green Berets think they are, but direct action is supposed to be with the 7th Ranger Regiment usually. So that is a very impressive, a little feather in your cap. What rank were you when you decided to do that?
So during my entirety of deployment, so that between 2012 and 2016, I only ever reached the rank of E5. I got passed over every single year that I was deployed because I was essentially on loan to the task force. So my National Guard unit back home thought that I was too cool to get promoted, and I was totally okay with that. I really loved the work that I found myself doing. I'm sure you guys can both agree that, we're certainly not in it for the money. And when you care about the mission and the people, that's really all that mattered to me.
James, you got a question?
Yeah. So what you describe of when the message came through seems very familiar because that's how I ended up on a PRT. Can you say how your experience, what you were expecting versus what you actually found yourself doing when you got there? What was that like? How close was that? And was it anything at all like what you were expecting?
Great question. And I would say a little bit of both, in that it was as wild and adventurous as I assumed it would be. I don't know about y'all, but when I first arrived to Afghanistan, it felt like this eerie dreamscape, like, everything to include like the blimps in the sky and, all of just like the intense security measures. All of that was very odd to me, but it was the fact that, we only left the wire at night. So, you're talking the only way that you could see was under night vision. And so everything's green and grainy. It does actually provide a interesting sense of security when you know that the bad guys can't actually see you. So that part was kind of reassuring, but, trying to learn how to walk under night vision and being able to traverse mountains and, wadis and all that in feet of snow, all of that stuff is incredibly challenging, especially when you've gotten very little training in preparation for deployment, especially that first go at it. So the learning curve was very real. But in terms of what I expected, I was really focused on the fact that like I was, a woman that had this opportunity to, prove myself and prove that women could hang. And I was hyper focused on that and like really what my performance would entail. But little did I know until I actually got to Afghanistan that my predominant role would be, it fell under the advise and assist mission. So I was attached to a Ranger platoon that at the time, the KTHAS, the Afghan Commando Special Forces, whatever you want to call them, they had just a single squad of guys that would go out as an element with the strike force. And so, just a small number of Afghan military, and then the rest were Rangers. And in that mix, there were 2 women from the Afghan Female Tactical Platoon, or FTP. I was a brand new program. And so while I had been sent there to perform a function for the Ranger Regiment, I was also responsible for making sure that our Afghan counterparts also knew how to do their job, which we were all brand new to it. And so it was a pretty big undertaking, responsibility for me to even know what right looked like for myself. Yeah. Let alone trying to advise them. So that part was unexpected in a good way, that I actually really ended up enjoying that part of the mission set. I developed really close relationships with the ladies, and that's really what kept me going back.
The female tactical platoon, FTPs, how were they recruited? Were they already in the ASF, or were they fresh recruits out of somewhere else?
So for the most part, they were already either Afghan National Police or Afghan National Army, with the exception of a few renegades that really, they were just civilians that kind of walked onto the program. They were told that there was this opportunity that existed for Afghan women to join a military unit that worked under the partnership of a U.S. military unit. And so there was a couple of them that were daring enough to say, like, sign me up, put me in, coach. And so they didn't have any prior military or police training. And so they just like went right into the mix. And, it's just still pretty wild to me that people like that exist on this earth.
Yeah, I mean, it takes for our listeners, getting Afghan women inside the ANSF was always a big hurdle, culturally and then also religiously, for all those reasons combined into one. What was the the attraction for the Afghan female recruits to join such a dangerous mission, especially in such a conservative country?
Well, I would say that by sheer product of the fact that they got paid, an extra kicker. Sure. They got a kickback for the fact that they were working in tandem with the U.S. So, their salaries increased quite a bit because of that. And, traditionally women aren't, in a formal career per se in Afghanistan. And so to have the opportunity to be, the head of household breadwinner, I think for them, I'm sure that was a big selling point, but I think also it was that they were really, a part of this movement where women never formally had these opportunities to participate in their society. And so when you think about how proud I love every opportunity I get to share this. The term that they give it is, I've heard them say that they were the most free.
Yeah.
So to think about that, these women, they felt the most free of all like women in Afghan society. And so I think that that's just so simple and direct and to the point as to why that was attractive to them.
And similarly to that, I think about most American public that don't know what we did, why we did, what we did, how we did in Afghanistan. I think they kind of look, especially in the current political climate, and say, why was the U.S. invested in this? Why did the U.S. try so hard to get women involved? What was the value or the return on investment on our side? I think some people may look at it as a social experiment that we attempted in another country, but I think there's probably some actual value to it, and I'm hoping you can share a little insight on that.
I love that question because that's where I tried to focus my energy on, especially in context to a lot of people, especially for those unlike us that don't have the years of investment in that country and the people. They consider the war to have been this like total failure, but not me. Sure, it was a social experiment, but it worked. And for a decade, these women not only proved themselves, but proved themselves to be an asset to, their particular unit. And so to see that unfold, and for myself particularly, I was very skeptical. When I first got to Afghanistan in 2012, you could not have paid me to believe that that was going to be a successful program. I didn't even have the confidence that I was going to be able to hang or that I would ever find a sense of acceptance from the Rangers, because in the beginning, trust that didn't come easy. The guys were told like not to talk to us unless it was mission essential. And, on occasion, we were just kind of treated poorly because here we were, women trying to enter a scene that was hyper masculine. And, it's the Army's biggest fraternity. And now here you've got women trying to like weasel their way in there and prove that they have something to offer. So, but they did succeed and they were damn good at it. And, for me to have seen that success, develop over time was just like the most unreal, successful thing that I've ever even witnessed, let alone participated in.
A couple of things that when I was listening to your comments, what struck me was that you talked about how proud they were. I think that's one of the things that the American public misses in the entirety of the war is that, sure, there was corruption. I'm sorry, who's the president of the United States? Never mind. And yes, there were some problems with the ANSF, sure. Compared to who? Pakistan, Iran, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan? All the same. And it was, for those that believed, and there was a lot of them that believed, they were proud. Today we published a second essay from one of my bros, Colonel Hail Shinwari. And if you read that, I'll put it in the show notes. You can sense this guy who was a C-130 pilot for the Afghan Air Force, how proud he was. When I talked to him about the story, I was so proud to do that, Will, to put my life on the line for those friends of mine. And I was proud to always fly with my American brothers. That pride, often lacking in the narrative about the Afghan security forces, the pride they had in the flag. When we talk about the female tactical platoons, how many were there overall by the end of the war?
Well, the best guess is upwards of about 80. And of course, they came at different stages in time. Some of them that were on the back end, that just made it onto the books, just made it through basic training. Sadly, they didn't have the connections as more of the senior girls did. I will always call them girls, sorry, but they are definitely fierce women. But so not all of them made it out of Afghanistan. During the evacuation, there was roughly 42 that were able to coordinate with individuals like myself to make it from their homes to the airport and safely onto flights. But I digress. There now today, there's 52 of these women in America, and then there are pockets of them in other countries, Pakistan, Tajikistan, Iran. A few of them made it over to Europe, but roughly 80 over 10 years. I went through the program.
Where were you when Afghanistan fell? What were you? How did you get? How did the whole thing unfold for you?
So, like many of my colleagues, these women started reaching out to us pretty, I know you're familiar with this, but, through WhatsApp, through Facebook, all the ways to get in touch and asking for support in terms of letters of recommendation. And the thought was that even though they didn't qualify for a special immigrant visa, we thought at least if we got them in the pipeline and started plugging paperwork in somewhere that,
Exactly.
they may actually have, a leg up on the process when things all came crashing down. So I was at home, in Charleston, South Carolina, and knew that it was going to get really, really bad. And like many people, had a pretty hard go at it. And I think that because I was at that time, I'd been out of the Army for going on 6 years, I believe. I felt really powerless.
Yeah.
And so I really leaned on my colleagues who were still active duty, that had connections, points of contact on the ground, that could actually do those types of negotiations and legwork to get those ladies into the door.
So I'll throw this one back out there for those of us who are unfamiliar. Again, I think we hear a lot of times about how the Afghans didn't stick around and fight, or why the Afghans were leaving. Can you shed a little light onto why an Afghan woman who had been involved in this program would not be very keen on staying in Afghanistan after the fall to the Taliban?
Well, aside from the very real paper trail that was left behind, think about it like this. These women were only allowed to join this unit if they had the eldest male in their family system sign a piece of paper that said that they agree with their employment with a, U.S. military entity. And so without that signature, we couldn't take them in. Furthermore, in order for them to stay employed with us, they had to be polygraphed, and they were the most vetted, like biannually, sometimes more. So that all existed somewhere, right? And there was no guarantee that that wasn't going to get into the hands of the wrong people. That's just one side of it. The other side is that these women, over the span of 10 years, had gone on hundreds of night raids directly into the homes of, Taliban, commanders and other variations of that. Their faces had been seen by bad guys and their wives and their daughters and mothers and children. And so, I don't know how you could even fathom that, that type of an individual stood even the slightest chance of survival when they'd been at that job for numerous years, numerous deployments, and, hundreds of operations that they'd been on. It wasn't a viable option.
Yeah, the thing that I'd add to that probably is, in addition to being polygraphed, everybody was biometrically enrolled. I would imagine.
Yeah.
And Will, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we've seen credible reporting that the Taliban got access to that biometric data and was using it in the search for specific high-value individuals as they were looking on their target and kill to purge Afghanistan of people that were very much like these folks we're talking about.
100%. Yeah, it's well documented. New York Times. I've read multiple stories about it. When we talk about the fall and all the things that came after, I always say that it was both the worst and the best of us, right? The worst of us being the suits and the bureaucrats who thought that you could just pull this out and it would be bad for a while and then Americans would forget, which kind of happened. And it was also the best of us because it was the best of all these Americans, who had been out of the game for 6 years, or who were still active duty, or who were just gotten out, all banded together to try to pool resources to step in for what the American government failed to do and is still failed to do. Is that when Next Mission started? Was it that quick, or did it take a little time after?
So Next Mission has been, something that's been in the works since the very first day that I met with Manaz, who was the former commander of the FTP. When I met with her for the first time in Maryland, actually at Dulles Airport, and our first, meaningful conversation, it was like, what are you thinking? And she was already, thinking ahead in terms of what she wanted to do next and what was within her control. And that conversation looked like, I want to have my own organization that will be able to provide assistance. If I'm never able to go back to my country, I want to be able to make an impact there. I want to, whether it's building orphanages or providing direct, assistance to folks in any variety of ways. That's what I want to do. And that planted a seed for me that said, all right, shit, well, let's do that, right? I mean, it's all possible. And so fortunately, we had the support of many amazing people, and as well, the PenFed Foundation was the sponsor of a program, the Afghan Allies program. And so for the first 3 years after they arrived, we were able to formally provide direct assistance that aided them in their resettlement immediately after they arrived to the state. So that was sort of the phase one of assistance. And then once that program was sunsetted at PenFed, then we rolled out Next Mission to continue that work.
So if you could kind of discuss a little bit about Next Mission, what your goals are, your vision for our listeners, I'm sure they'd enjoy it.
You guys, I'm so grateful for this opportunity, really. And especially because I know that you guys have a lot of passion about, these types of projects and your own work. And for me, this is definitely, I've been saying this is like a bucket list thing for me since I left Afghanistan in 2016. I knew that I wanted to find a mechanism of support that was something outside of the scope of training that we offered as, the advise and assist team. Yeah, it's cool to teach women how to be deadly shots. Not that they needed a lot of training, because they will hands down kick anyone's ass. I will put my entire life savings on that. They are that good.
Just for the record.
But, and that's a very meaningful skill set, right? Where do you go beyond that? And so, I was looking for opportunities to provide some type of education resources, or virtual training. And this was far long before the withdrawal, but nothing made sense. There were so many challenges and barriers to entry. We even had to offer scholarships to these women to do a MicroMasters program, but they couldn't participate in it because it wasn't translated in their language, right? And so the opportunities were there. There was just too many barriers. And so for Next Mission, we want to just be able to provide individualized care and support to each one of these women that possibly replicates, what veterans like us have access to in the United States. I always use the term, there is a sea of goodwill that exists for veterans in this country. And why are they any less deserving? Their sacrifices are infinitely greater than what most of us have done, yet they don't have access to recreational programs or equine therapy or, the list goes on. And so I think that that's what the hope is for Next Mission today. And then going beyond that, it's just sort of a personal desire to see that something that we can do together can be formally handed over to them, and something that can belong to them and to be theirs to do with whatever it is that they decide to be right for them, for their colleagues. They're very much passionate about being able to help their male colleagues that did not make it out. The amount of survivor's guilt that they have because as women, they were prioritized. And so, that sticks with them every single day. And so if Next Mission can be a vehicle for that, then that's why it exists.
Before I let James ask a question, just put a little bit of context. I know we've been talking about a lot of the female tactical platoons, but just for our listeners, by the end of the war, there's about over 3,000 Afghan women in the Afghan security forces. There were some in the ANA, there were some in the Afghan police. And then there was also, for those that don't know, there was Afghan Air Force female pilots. In fact, there was a squadron commander. I met her, lovely lady, very, very, very good leader. And she was in charge of a whole squadron. So you can make the arguments about the various different mistakes that we made. But the biggest mistake, I would say, was continually pushing this on people, even though we knew for certain that we were about to leave. And the reason why I say that is because I was in the meetings. And it was us strong-arming the Afghans to give us more women, even though we knew soon we were leaving. And that is the type of moral injury that, so many of us carry with us because we saw these types of things take place and we were powerless to do anything about it. James, we talk a lot about moral injury and, I think all of us here have felt that, with the Afghan withdrawal, as somebody who served for a few years. I don't know, maybe you could talk a little bit about your experience for the listeners as well. You haven't been on in a while.
I think something that really fits in here, I'll talk about too, but just starting with, the moral injury side of the service in Afghanistan, right? Where we go and we do the nation's work, and sometimes it's not the prettiest, right? I served in Afghanistan on a combat tour. I served in Afghanistan on a tour inside the Green Zone. And then I served in an MQ-9 wing where we were heavily kinetic and targeting the Taliban leadership. So I think the weight of war in and of itself sometimes asks us to take on burdens that are then hard to shed off and to rectify when we get back home. And I think that's part of it. A long time we would have probably just said, he's got PTSD. I think it's good that we sort of understand that those two things are different. You can have the physiological change to the brain that is PTSD, or you can have the conscious of what you've been asked to do and the mission that you were asked to do and the result of it. And then I think so there's that part. Then I would call the first betrayal. And that was those of us that had served there, that had invested emotionally, and then to see us leave the way that we did, to surrender our allies on their behalf without giving them a seat at the table, and then turn our backs, actively undermine their offensive kinetic capabilities, their ability to take the fight to the Taliban and continue to fight for their own freedom. They could only fight to delay their overthrow. And so that's what I would call the first betrayal. And I think what we're on the cusp right now is the second betrayal, as we start to see policy shift away from bringing those who we made promises to out, those that earn at least our sympathy, and start to make those avenues to get out of Afghanistan to protect themselves and their family, make that more difficult at best, or potentially make it, or reverse policies to start even going back further and taking away the bit of progress that we've seen. And I know recently there was an article published about an Afghan military person that we had brought out that was in America, that did everything the right way, got to Mexico, submitted an application, showed up to his appointment at the border, didn't cross the border illegally, was led into the country legally, given a court date to come back. And he had to do, I think it was quarterly check-ins or annual check-ins. And then one time he shows up for his check-in, they arrest him and they deport him, just revoked his parole status. And so that's part of what I would call the second betrayal of not just our allies, but those of us that fought and tried to secure freedom for both of us.
Yeah. I think that's pretty well said, James. I think during the fall was pretty rough on me, obviously, active duty. I think it was the real reason why I retired and left was I lost faith in our country, in our service, in our general officer corps, especially, who has been mute since then, mostly. Yeah, and so we're talking about moral injury, Rebekah. How did you get involved in that space? Was it just, had you always been wanting to do this type of work, or was it just a natural flow?
If I'm being totally honest,
Yeah.
when I first heard the term, was a little turned off by it.
Yeah.
I thought like what, kind of whatever is this? I guess it didn't quite land with me because I didn't quite realize how that showed up for me. And I think to James's point, that betrayal aspect, or that, guilty by association. Like maybe it wasn't me specifically that made it so that, everything came crashing down upon them and their country. But you certainly feel a certain amount of responsibility when, you were there. You asked at the beginning how these women were recruited. Like, I made several trips to KMTC, Kabul Military Training Center, like the Fort Benning of Afghanistan. And as women were graduating from their basic trainings, I'd be like, hey, you look pretty strong. You want to come and work for the US? And so having played that role to, I guess, lure people into this program, I mean, you certainly didn't feel like that at the time. But, in retrospect, it's like, wow, like, would this person be better off had they never met me? If they'd never, if I never played this role to, indoctrinate them into this type of an environment. And so that's when it started making more sense, I suppose. Definitely, after the withdrawal and all of that stuff became very real to me. For a few years, I was kind of fighting it. And I was like, yeah, I was even asked to speak at something on the topic. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. But today, what's really helpful is to have folks like y'all that are now in my life that I have such respect for, and I can see how that shows up for you. And also, it's validating in that, it's not something that is gonna necessarily stick with me forever, but it is now, and I can sort through that stuff through meaningful dialogue with others that also have experienced this type of consequence for their military service. So that's sort of kind of how I started getting involved, is by going through that self-realization that it does in fact resonate for me.
Yeah, I didn't even know the term. I'd read Shay's Achille in Vietnam before I deployed at some point, but I didn't really remember it. But I remember, I think it was the first week of the evac, and I was sitting in this hotel room in downtown DC. I'm sure I was very hungover, and I was looking at myself in the mirror, and I was like, what did I do all this for? What was this all for? Why did I do this to myself? I missed almost missed the birth of my daughter. I missed my father's death, blah, 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 blah. And this is what kind of starts going through everybody's minds when their life's work goes up in flames, right? And it is, I was diagnosed with PTSD in 2006, I think, when I came back off of my first deployment. It was a different military back then. Wasn't very talked about. I remember my commander making fun of me, my first commander, because I was going to see a doctor. And, that was the type of military it was. But now when this happened to me, I was like, this is way worse than like combat PTSD, which for me was always like just survival. This is how I survived in war. And of course, my body's going to react like this because I know how to survive. But this thing, I actually like an older description of it as like a soul wound. It is a piercing dagger, and it stings, and it's there all the time because I see it, when you look at the news, when you talk to your friends, all of us probably have Afghans in our lives, and it's that survivor's guilt, that they have. It's the fact that you talk to them and they're like, most of their family's still there, trapped. That's where that moral injury comes from. So could you tell me, like, how did you go to like school to become a therapist, or did you just kind of stumble upon this?
A bit of both.
Okay.
I mean, I stumbled upon, being involved with, the moral injury discussion after having, I just recently got my master's in social work, and all of that. Thank you.
Yeah.
In efforts of, just like you guys, you can't exactly disconnect, once you've sort of lived your life a certain way for so long, and this becomes a part of who you are. It's damn near impossible to just walk away from that idea that we are put on this earth to help each other And so for me, going back to school and really doing a lot of introspection on what that might look like in this next chapter of my life, I started with sociology because I was, fresh back from Afghanistan. And I thought maybe if I can better understand like cultures and why people do the things that they do, maybe I could start making sense of what I just went through. That led me then into social work. And then I started finding opportunities to work in peer support, which I feel like is truly a lifesaver for a lot of people that, traditional modes of therapy just isn't a good fit. And so having folks that you can connect with and rebuild your community, have people that you respect, admire, and look up to, and to know that you have similar experiences, I think that that is where the healing takes place.
Yeah, I would say that there's something just therapeutic about sitting with veterans, even if you don't talk about it, but sitting with other veterans that have been through the same thing. There's times that I've been just hanging with friends that were also veterans. We didn't serve together. We didn't even serve in the same theater, but just sitting on the back porch, having beer, talking about the football game was in and of itself a healing environment, and that you have that common brotherhood or sisterhood or whatever you want to call it, that sense of camaraderie that still exists just being in that peer environment. I think that's huge. And then when the ghosts come to knock, those are the people that aren't going to judge you when you're able to share the stories of those ghosts, and when you need help because of that. I think that's a huge deal. And I think that really kind of points back to what Will's trying to do here with GCV and bringing these stories out. I can personally attest that I remember when I heard moral injury for the first time, and it wasn't reading it in some book about Vietnam. I was on my way. I dropped somebody off at the airport in Orlando. I decided since I was in Orlando, I was going to go to some store over there, Cabela's or Bass Pro Shop or something. And I pulled into the parking lot and I saw Will had just published an article, and I spent an hour and a half trying to read the article through the tears that were running down my, filling my eyes, because for the first time it explained some of the feelings that I was feeling, some of the actual burden that I had taken on unknowingly. And so as someone who's now participating in one of your groups, I think it's huge for us to be able to get together with veterans all like that. And even if we're talking about the weather in New Mexico versus the weather in Florida, right? Just being able to build that level of camaraderie with people that have been here in similar situations with us, the ability to share some of the burden that we're carrying amongst those peers, I think is huge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would argue it's our group, and that it's definitely our group. That, like, the thing that I really love and appreciate about our group is that, everyone's from a different walk of life. Granted, it is a little heavy slanted on the Air Force side. I do appreciate that, though. Is that, you've got folks from all sorts of different backgrounds, and there's no ego. In fact, I find that if somebody starts to sound like they are minimizing their experience, it doesn't take long for somebody to step in and be like, whoa, hold on a second. Like, this is a valid thing. And, I think that every month that we've met, I've just grown more admiration, for the group as a whole, and then, folks individually. So it just feels really good to, like, find people that you admire, respect, and you can trust. I think that trust is a huge thing that we start to, miss when everything that you've once known and could trust and rely on is missing. It's reestablishing those bonds and those trusted networks that are so important.
It's always important for combat vets or any vets to have friends when they leave service. It can be a very disorienting experience. You kind of, here you go, good luck. And you kind of walk out and you go, this is what I'm doing right now. I'm like, what happened to this country over the last 20 years?
We're all doing that.
Why is everybody so angry at each other? Hey, everybody, did you know that pot is legal in almost half the states? I don't know. Take a drive, relax a little bit. Because I walk around even where I live, and like, it is a battle zone of anger. And for veterans that have been out, they're walking around and they go, this is weird. You can step on landmines all the time, and you say something that was okay 5 years ago, but now you say it and there's a problem for you. And these are all the different types of things that veterans have to go through as they leave service. And it can be very disoriented and then lonely. And then that's why it's important that we have these type of groups. And also, we're going to if people didn't know, I don't think I've said it, we're going to do another one here. We're going to have a second iteration. We'll have some more information on that here the next few months or so, sign up stuff and all that type of stuff. But, as we wrap up, Rebekah, I wanted to give you the last opportunity to, let's talk a little bit more about Next Mission, anything that you want to tell our listeners before we wrap up. And obviously, thank you for making time to come on our show.
Gosh, I'm the one that should be thanking you. I think that this whole conversation has been very gratifying. I will say that it's taken me several years to be able to have this type of a conversation. And yes, I did have my glass of wine handy, but it wasn't that I needed it, right? Just to be able to utter some of these words. So I can appreciate the growth that has taken place. But for me, I think that that's in part what Next Mission is. It is an opportunity to sort of rewrite, the outcome of what otherwise is a very devastating thing for so many people. And so when you can make positive gains in whatever capacity, we're going to be going down to
Nice.
to see Liz Carmouche fight. Former UFC, now fighting for PFL, another veteran. She was a part of the Lioness program.
Nice.
And, we got connected to her through Operation Vet Now, another VSO. And so it's just building these types of connections with other veterans like yourself, other veteran service organizations that acknowledge and recognize that what these women have done is so important and should be honored, valued, respected, cherished. And anybody that wouldn't want to spend time with with any one of these ladies, I don't know what's wrong with them. They're my
concert, lovely ladies.
Yeah,
Fierce, watch out. They may be small, deadly. Don't
let it fool you.
Don't let it fool you. James, you got anything before we close out, brother?
No, I just, other than to say, I'd appreciate you coming on and sharing this. Not with us, but with everybody else. I mean, I think the service side of what you did while you were in, and then your continued service since you've been out and trying to stand this up, is one of the great things that maybe they should make a Hollywood show about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
like you
about the FTPs for sure.
They
absolutely
should. That would be a great one.
Yeah.
I want to thank you for coming on. Our listeners, you can go to nextmission.org. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
nextmission.org. I'll put it in the show notes. If you haven't given to your charity this year, there's a good one. GCV recommends. Go ahead. Don't be stingy. Give freely. All right. I want to thank all of my listeners for tuning in. We appreciate your support. Please give us 5 stars. Just do it because you want to support groups. All right. Until next time, this is GCV6 and I'm out.
Thanks, guys.
Been home for a couple of years now, buddy, but you're still fighting the war.